I would like also to look at another aspect. We've talked now about what can the private sector potentially can bring on the table. But I wanted to turn to Mr. Shaun Ferris of CRS to just think about, if we talk about innovation, really, particularly in terms of financing this, what do you think that innovative finance, what role innovative finance can play just beyond a reliance on donor funding to address these challenges? What at CRS do you have in terms of, or are you working on in terms of innovation, that in terms of innovative finance that could bring a viable solution or an interesting solution to this?
Thanks very much, Mamadou. Great to follow Hans, who said that we don't need innovation, and I'm just about to talk about innovation. So anyway, no, I think one of the things that we like to think about when we're doing this innovation, and it's related to this idea of resilience, is how can we set up systems that put some rigor behind that innovation process as we're looking at this new area of resilience. So one of the tools that we're using at CRS is to really get people to think about working at different scales, and how does an innovation really work at scale. And I think that's one of the roles that we would like to see ourselves playing as we go into the next 5 to 10 years, is to moving away from the sort of situation where we're working to implement ideas to one more where we're facilitating ideas and working through a lot of local actors and partners. And when we're doing that kind of thing, we shift what we're doing away from household and community level interventions, and we're really starting to look at how can we work with local governments, and how can we align these ideas with the national policies of a certain country and what they're actually doing. So one of the things that we do try and do when we're thinking about what are interventions that we're going to be applying within a new investment area is, how does that align across these different scale intervention levels? And how can we not have this situation where innovation means we have to develop a new product every week, and we spend all of our time developing these new ideas. Whereas what I think we should be doing is looking at the best of our ideas, standardizing those and scaling those along with other partners, so that we get a much more consistent approach with the communities and with the partners that we're working with. And I think that allows us to measure things much more easily. You cannot measure 1,000 innovations at once and have sort of a really strong learning process. So this ability to harness the power, if you like, of innovation, but look at scaling through that process, I think is a really important process. Now, just to get to this next idea then, how can we leverage the idea of different financial mechanisms to help us scale ideas as well? I'm just going to give you a couple of slides on this, and the first one really is showing the theory of change that we're using within the agricultural livelihoods team at CRS, just to show you, you have to see this one to understand the next one, kind of thing. We're working with entire communities. I hope that you can see a little bit of this at the back. But we're working with communities where we're working with poorer segments within the community, middle sort of groups, and those which have better assets. So we're trying to segment communities and then target interventions at those different levels. And what we would of course like to see is that the more vulnerable people are starting to go up this pathway to prosperity. And in kind of shorthand, if you like, really at that bottom level, we're looking at a lot of asset delivery, and that's been a traditional area where we've worked, but we're placing much more emphasis on skills and then linkages to services. So this, if you like, is this idea of the pathway of a theory of change. So how does this then relate back to resilience and financing? Okay, I'm just going to push this here. So as Ashwin said, here's the whiteboard. And what I'm going to try and do here, if it works, is to show you how we're trying to link the ideas of emergency or humanitarian relief with the ideas of development. And so if I just go to this first section again, here you see the pathway to prosperity again, but I've added in the emergency component, okay? So we're starting sort of to bring this idea together of what is emergency teams doing and what are development people doing, and I've changed those names slightly, so you'll see at the bottom level, we're really looking at grant capital. These are emergency funds to save lives, public funding. As you start to go into this transition area, you're looking at different levels of different ways of financing things, you might bring in savings and loans, you might start to get into microfinance areas. As you start to get into this grow area, this middle area, you're bringing in much more private capital, whether that's through local banks. And as you go to this top area, you're really bringing in more of the private capital, whether that's debt or an equity position, but you're looking at leveraging in new types of capital and really blending those types of capital so that what was restricted to grant funding in the past now has a better opportunity to grow with these new sources of capital. So the trick then is, how does that sort of work with this idea of resilience? So I'm going to just see if I can get this animation to work. So we have a shop. That little group there is the community. Okay, if you can see that at the back, that's a community, and they're in a vulnerable position. A shock happens. It could be a flood, it could be a drought, or some sort of crisis. At the moment, a lot of those people fall straight into an emergency situation, which is a very expensive response. And we're finding that as the more and more people need this kind of thing, a lot more money is being put into emergency support, and that is taking away capital from development areas. So one of the problems with that, I think, is that you get this situation where can you indeed bounce back better if you don't have enough funding to get to the development side? And I think that's a real sort of danger that many of us are facing. So to get around some of those ideas, the emergency teams, as you probably know, have been working on this idea called disaster risk reduction. So they are investing in communities who face recurrent shocks so that when things happen again, they're better prepared to be able to cope with those shocks. And if we follow the logic in that, if that works, less money is spent on emergency, people don't fall quite as far, and they may fall into that transition phase, or a part of that community may fall into a transition phase rather than going into the most expensive bucket, which is the emergency bucket. And taking that sort of a step further, now that resilience is coming into the picture, if we're doing resilience programming and we're starting to really bring together emergency and development teams and really looking at how we can co-invest with communities and co-invest with different types of actors in this space, if we start to get that to work, I think you get your shock again, and then you have that kind of pathway where people do not fall as far, or fewer people fall as far. And I think a lot of the work that we are doing now in terms of this idea of metrics is to try and look at some of these different trajectories that people actually have, and then be able to measure what share of a shocked community is falling into these different trajectories, and how can we get financing into these systems that pushes people up into a much better pathway in the future. So just as Hans was saying, working with farmers, you need consistent, clear messaging. You need to provide them with a good understanding of what the market opportunity is available for them, but then we need to bring in better financing tools, through various types of investments in order to enable them to not only buy the technologies, but also to be able to get access to things like, the holy grail thing of the insurance, but to be able to get different services that they need in order to become much more resilient. And if you'd been to the previous meeting, actually, Hans made that very same point. Resilience isn't just about knowing how to cope, it's being able to access the types of services that many people have in the West that allows them to take more risk, but actually not fall very far when some sort of crisis happens. So anyway, just sort of trying to get through those ideas, and I think the real challenge for us in the development world now is to be able to align ourselves with different types of investors to develop those new vehicles for that type of investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.